The schedule is a little bit in flux right now, so as of next Monday, I think we'll have a better and more solid ability to tell you when the subsequent dates are. But we also have in the next number of sessions some really dynamic speakers lined up, including Alicia Wallace from Quality Bahamas, Shantez Dillett-Wilson, who's now working out of the Office of Prime Minister, folks from the central bank, and some other financial consultants that will help us. And even we're hoping to have a good access to a bunch of potential funders who will talk directly to you about what they're looking for and provide some training and some information. So in the next 2 months, we're hoping to bring a lot more information that will be applicable to your direct operation of your not-for-profit, but also prepare you to be more effective in working with clusters. Just for our own sake, let's do a very brief round of introductions. A number of you know each other, but just on the case that not everybody knows who's in the room. So let's start. I have it in my sequence. It looks like Stephanie, Juliet, Jerry, and Gail. So Stephanie, can you just do a quick introduction of who you are and what your organization is and what you're working on?
Good morning, everyone. Thank God for another day. My name is Minister Stephanie Frith. I am the president and executive director of Princess Court Mentoring Ministries.
So, and been an active participant from the get-go of these sessions. So thank you, Stephanie. Juliet?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Juliet Deal. I'm the co-founder and director for Hopetown Zero Waste, which first started in 2015, and it's a waste reduction and diversion organization and community-based program, and now part of a larger organization called Abaco Zero Waste. Well, I should say the organization is Resurrect Abaco, but the program is called Abaco Zero Waste. And I am the strategic director for that, and we are scaling up Hopetown Zero Waste on mainland Abaco. Thank you for hosting the session.
And a special, Juliet, thanks, because I think you are, it is probably much earlier, because I think, are you still coming to us from Western Canada?
That is correct, yes.
So you get extra points for that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Jerry.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jerry Kelly Russell. I am the co-founder of Island Manor. We are a new grassroots NPO focusing on food and agricultural food systems. And we're based in Grand Bahama. So I'm very excited to learn as much as possible. I wasn't able to participate in the first 2 sessions, and I've been following along with the YouTube videos, and I'm very grateful for the information and advice that I have listened to so far. So I'm glad and looking forward to today's session and those to come.
Thank you, Jerry. And we were and we will come to Grand Bahama. We were organized to do that. Unfortunately, the partnership with CoLab had to be moved into potentially mid-April. So we're looking at coming up with a date. But we're super excited to come there. Stefan and our engagement team were actually just there yesterday, meeting and putting forward our Active Citizens Bahamas sessions, and had a chance to meet with some really great groups. But we're so excited. So thank you so much, Jerry. We'll get you up to speed in this next few minutes. But we're looking forward to seeing you in person in the next month or so.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Stephanie, Jerry, Juliet, Gail.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is feeling well today.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Gail Falk. I am with the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund. And our organization is actually a national conservation trust fund with a responsibility to raise sustainable financing for protected areas across the Bahamas. In addition to marine protected areas, research, and making policies that govern the protected areas. So basically, our task is to find funds to sustain these areas. Thank you.
That's great, and I think also what the work that Gail, that you're doing too, also puts you in great position to partner with a lot of different organizations. I know you've worked with them in a lot of settings already, so I think that is exciting.
Yes,
there
we
was
do.
one other participant, but it looks like we've lost them. They probably will, as soon as they sign back in, we'll go ahead and do the introductions. So a very quick recap of what we've talked about in the last two sessions to Jerry and Juliet, and thank you for participating on and looking at those resources. We've talked a lot about what potentially a cluster model could look at here. Our first session was really us coming together, and what I want to clarify for this training is it's a little bit different than some of the other capacity building exercises we've had. In very many ways, what we asked specifically are that folks who are already running organizations, that have formed organizations, maybe have just started them or even are leading them for a long time, to come together, because what we want to do is build off of the knowledge and experience that you already have. Applying the concepts we have in many ways, you might be doing things you're already working on, and this just gives you a chance to analyze it, become maybe more strategic, and look at how you can apply it. And the theme, I think, of everything we've talked about is really being intentional. So a lot of things as not-for-profits happen organically. Sometimes we're formed in reaction to a problem, or our progression happens when we get a funder, or we got to do a project, or we make a partner that comes up through circumstances. What we're talking about as we've gone through is that the focus of being very intentional and planned and strategic can maximize the impact of not only your organization, but any other organizations that you're working with. So the first session, we really talked a little bit about what does collaboration look like, and what would it mean, and what could a model and collaboration model here apply. The second session, we talked a little bit about how we work on leadership and the concepts of leadership. We talked also about what an actual working cluster that was organized around disaster management really looks like, and Atwal Pinder from Sanagest shared her perspectives. That was really exciting. And then we kind of came back a little bit, and we again talked about how would we find ourselves, and what does this process of collaboration look like? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? So today we want to now start working into very specific skills that can not only benefit you working directly in your organization, collaboration, tools that you can use, and ways we can formalize these. So today we're going to take a few minutes just to review some of the homework that we put forward. And I know some of you haven't had a chance to do that, but I think it'll still be a worthy and relevant discussion to get your thoughts. We're going to talk about and look at some of the types of formal collaborations, what that means. We're going to look at how we start to work on setting collaborative goals, so goals that happen among different organizations. Sorry, this is actually the wrong agenda. Sorry, I realized. Excuse me, I'm in the wrong PowerPoint. Hold on, let me pull that back up. Sorry, we'll jump on this. It happens. I see. Tech is still not the best for us today. There it is. Great. Okay. And slide. Yeah. Zoom. While I'm pulling this up, I see Kathania Missick has joined us. Kathania, do you want to just do a quick introduction of yourself and your organization? Oh, great. Thank you so much. There we go. Sorry. So we're going to talk about types of formal collaborations, work on setting goals, have a bit of a discussion on project management. Stefan Evans has many talents, our assistant director here at the Organization for Responsible Governance. But among those, he's done some wonderful work both for us and other organizations on the concepts of project management. So he's going to share some insights that might be really applicable as we go forward. And then we'll be able to give you access to some levels of resources as we go. So that's our day. We're going to try and close at 12:45, making it short and sweet and kind of using the time so that we also can get you back to the work that you're doing. And if there are, again, other ideas or topics that you would like to raise or share, feel free to do so by either raising your hand, sharing it in the chat, or if you feel like we haven't seen your hand up, feel free to just unmute and make your contribution. So the homework we talked about last, just to, again, this is the grounding of what our project is. We always want to go back to what we're trying to achieve. So we're working on building more collaborative, topical and strategic clusters. So not ones that are applied by government, not ones that are required by a particular funder, but ones that are identified by not-for-profits here in the Bahamas because they are important and meaningful to them. So Juliet will, I'm sure, have a chance to share a little bit of her expertise and experience, but where a common issue has been found and groups that gather and motivate themselves to organize have a greater opportunity for resilience, for sustainability, and they're a little bit more under our direction than being reactive to an external call. We're going to be conducting 7 sessions. This is the third of the 7, and these discussions and training segments usually have 2 parts. Today it's a little bit of a blended, but usually the morning session is a bit more of a learning session where either ourselves or other experts are going to come in and provide information. And then the afternoon will be more of an activity session. So today we're going to kind of combine both of those, but we'll go back to our same form in the subsequent sessions. And ultimately, again, they're around cooperation and collaborative objectives. So today is really that beginning of that work. Any questions or comments on that? Any points we didn't cover in our project overview that you feel like we should maybe be attentive to that would help you? All right, I'm going to take the silence as indication that we're on track. So our homework in the last session was really trying to do a check-in, not just within, we hope that the people that have participated and that you coming to this session have already understood that collaboration becomes a benefit, but we also wanted to get a sense from the extended teams. So what do your teams, your volunteers, your boards feel about your organization participating in a topical or a regional cluster? So by topical, we mean thematic, like it is child development or waste management or food systems, food security, or regional, saying, hey, this is all the groups, say in the Grand Bahama region or in 8 Mile Rock, or this is the groups that are meeting that are from the Southern Bahamas, because there's some common threads there. So this is just an opportunity to hear from your side. Any thoughts or any experiences you've had about reactions that your extended team or the boards, the volunteer leaders from your organizations have had on thinking about partnership? Good or bad?
Hi, Matt.
Hi, Julia.
Well, I would say that for us, it's very well received when we're part of other collaborative, mainly workshops and opportunities to kind of share what we're working on. From a bandwidth perspective, it is difficult with different stakeholders, especially with Hopetown Zero Waste. We have a number of stakeholders that are part of our program. So we have the school, the community center, the local waste management company, and then several resorts and businesses. And then the same goes for the Abaco Zero Waste as well. So I would say that one of the challenges that we face is coordinating schedules. So when an opportunity comes up, especially if it's a granting opportunity, looking at how we come together as a group and making sure that we're coordinating our schedules, because we are volunteer based. And so that does present a challenge at times when there's conflicting agendas, or where they have to focus on their day-to-day businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is, I think, going to be a common issue. I mean, I think one things with all of our organizations tend to be really, really busy, and it seems like a post-COVID dynamic is we've now even stretched the work time and balance in a very different way. So everybody's got too many things they're kind of involved in, and so finding those common times, I think, is going to be challenging. I think it's also what's I was impressed with meeting with your team is how active so many folks are, and I think that's really great. The interesting thing related to teams and dynamics is, and I've had this experience, is I might be representing the organization within a collaboration or a cluster or a partnership, but then I'm bringing that back to people who haven't been at that table. When you're direct team members, those volunteers or those paid staff, they may have a better day-to-day understanding, but your volunteer leaders, they may not have the clear understanding. So when you're telling why we're sacrificing this or committing to this, they may not have the same context or same understanding. So I don't know if anybody has had that experience, but that's also another thing that's come up in different ways. So different timelines, but different expectations, and maybe not the full understanding of why a collaboration might be beneficial. Other folks, Stephanie, any or Gail or Jerry?
Sorry, Matt. Now, from my perspective, as I mentioned earlier, I am basically new to the organization, so I'm really learning how we work together with other partners. But from our standpoint, we are a granting agency. So when we work with our partners, we have clear guidelines when they would have applied for a grant, and we we release the funds. They have to abide by, I guess, an agreement of sorts. And so basically, from that standpoint, they're really just following a set guidelines. And in addition to that, we work along with other partners like the BNP and TNC, or the Nature Conservancy. Sorry about the acronym. So I think, as you mentioned, we sometimes can all share that the challenges we face sometimes could be scheduling or receiving things according to the deadlines that we've set. So I am still learning to see how from my standpoint, how we partner with other agencies.
Well, and I would also imagine, as you said, your organization is organized around the facilitation of partnerships. Like, the funder is you're executing through different ways. So it's also, they've been oriented from the get-go to know that this is the model of operation. So that would definitely lend to that. Yeah. Jerry, I see your hand up. Feel free.
Hi, so for us, we're looking to engage within the next few months with a co-op on the island, and both the co-op is new, our NPO is new, so we're just trying to discuss the various roles and who will be responsible for what, and what is expected from each organization or group. So for us, this is very timely so that we could have some navigation in this future engagement, and to know how we could what we can expect from each each group. So the dynamics will be very interesting. And I think over the next month, we'll be able to say more as to how we have approached this new partnership.
That's great. The, can folks still hear me?
Recording in progress.
Hi, Matt. I can hear you now, but you did drop off.
Yeah, same.
I think you have to repeat that, Max.
Sorry, Olivia, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your introduction. I apologize. So maybe one more time. Is it picking up on the speaker?
Sorry, Matt, you had broken up, so I didn't even hear you say that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So if we had a little bit of a tech glitch, I apologize.
Okay, John.
But go ahead, Olivia, and then Portia, just take a few seconds to introduce yourselves. Although you probably have done that already, but just for my benefit.
Good morning, everyone. I actually joined late. I'm Olivia Patterson-Mora. I'm the Deputy Director of Friends of the Environment in Abaco.
And Portia?
Can you repeat that, please?
Portia, I was just asking you to briefly introduce yourself and the organization so everybody knows who's in the room.
Oh, this is Portia Speeding. I am Director of Education with the Bahamas National Trust, the BNT.
Yes. And then Trevor, I just saw Trevor joined us as well. So Trevor, if you just quickly introduce yourself to the group. I think Trevor's still muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
See
Is that it?
his image, yeah.
Is that okay? Hello?
Yes, that's great.
Okay.
Sounds like it is an active scenario with Trevor at this moment.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, Trevor.
Okay. Yeah, I'm the president of the Bahamas Outstanding Student Foundation.
Great. And so the last little bit before we move on was this question of you yourself may be the representative in terms of engaging other groups, being the collaborators as a leader. Reactions from your teams or your board members on some of those potential partnerships. How do they feel about partnering with other organizations? Are there positive things that come out of that or negative things? So if anybody had any last minute thoughts on that, who hasn't had a chance to speak? Trevor, did you want to add in on that?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thought I'm having a connection problem. In regards to that, there was no concerns about that. Everybody support the idea because the more participation, the more relationships, the better you can grow and expand and improve whatever programs that you are sponsoring. So it's totally endorsed.
Great. And I see also we have somebody, Ormanic. Who is that? Oh, yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, got it. That was the other one. Got it. Moving from that, the real thought is that we need, for collaborations to work, we need the whole teams on board. It's critical to have their representation. It's critical to ensure that when representing the that you don't that you have everybody on board. I will share not one of our best hits. So at a certain point early on, maybe not early on, but let's say in 2017, 2018, the Gaming Association developed industry, but they also were identifying where were other ways that they wanted to have an impact philanthropically. Like, where did they want to give back in the community? They all were doing so in different ways, but as a collective, what could they do to contribute to different national issues? And we met them somewhat early on, and we had some really good conversations, because our interest area, in addition to accountable governance and economic development and civil society capacity building, is also education. We've done a lot of focus on education as a way of building our youth's capacity and making our country more sustainable. So we met them and talked with them, and it turned out that they also had an interest in the area of education. And so we started talking about what they were looking to do, what we were looking to do. They were talking about scholarships, and we were talking about different types of school models and teaching kids more social, emotional concepts. But what we also both landed on is we really all had a same interest in investing in early childhood development. So making sure that kids in those first 1,000 days had every access to nutrition and learning, and that parents had the skills, particularly in some of our more underserved communities, had the skills to be able to facilitate early childhood development. Because what we know is research says is if you help a child meet certain developmental milestones in the first 1,000 days, it not only increases their likelihood of graduation, better health, better vocational success, but it also, on the reverse, minimizes their risk of going into the correctional system or falling into really negative certain outcomes like social or health outcomes. So we then had these really significant conversations and found a common thread. And we started to have a little bit of a planning of where might we partner and what would the need be and what would each of us bring together. That happened on a Monday. On the Wednesday, we pick up the newspaper, and our chair was asked by somebody as a reporter what he thought of the gaming board. And he let loose with a whole long, not very positive statement of what he thought about gaming industry and what it meant and what it should do and what the game board. And we were really, really, really caught out there without any understanding. And it literally had been that on Monday, we didn't get a chance to talk to our board. We usually talk to them maybe weekly, every other week. We had that meeting. Wednesday, with no alignment, he was asked this question and had no understanding that we had already had these conversations and didn't get the sense of what we brought forward. And it, of course, ended up in the newspaper when the gaming board said, how come the top of this organization doesn't know what the other parts of the organization are doing? And it was really what could have been a very strong potential partnership fell away early on just because we hadn't done the work to connect all of our parts. And unfortunately, Juliet said, timelines, agendas, these play out very signally, but they also talk about the necessity for making sure that as you go forward, that the organization is fully in line with whatever it's going to go forward with. So it just highlights, again, needing that the team's on board, needing that the board is on board, and understanding their thoughts and ideas when you go to that relationship discussion about what do we do. So any additional thoughts before I move into the heart of the presentation? All right, we're moving forward. So in our discussion about looking at more formal partnerships, sorry, I just have to get rid of this. Just to define it, what we're talking about is when a group of two or more entities are working towards common interests, where they're sharing and talking about resources, activities, or skills, so that they can promote broader goals and outcomes that are going to benefit the entirety of that collective group, and or achieve some kind of social change, which is really, again, that we're in the not-for-profit side of things, the end goal. But it's also important to understand that those partnerships are to be seen as relationships. And we'll talk a little bit about how to frame that up. But they are ongoing. They need attention, like any relationship you have with a friend or a family member or even a business colleague. Where it starts and where it ends up can be very different based on how you act and treat it. And so understanding that partnerships are not simply 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, but that there needs to be a process of managing those relationships also is important. So you can meet with as an organization and say, hey, here's our objective, but there needs to be an understanding that that objective needs to be massaged, needs to be tended, and needs to be prioritized, like every relationship. And also that collaborations are processes. They have phases, they have required efforts that need to happen. And what the ongoing top line objective, we're organizing to put together one event. That may be a very simple goal that 4 or 5 organizations are coming together, but you also have to recognize that in going forward, that all of those organizations are probably working at different timelines, with different standard operating procedures, with potentially different expectations. And so recognizing the need for not only what you're trying to achieve to be identified and agreed upon, but how you're going to achieve that is also really, really critical. When you partner up and make decisions on who's going to do what, and we'll show a little bit of a tool around how to do that, it also means that you have to think it's not just one objective. Okay, you're going to go out and do outreach, and you're going to make sure that the logistics are taken care of, and you're going to secure the keynote speaker. Each organization might be able to do that in a different way, or might have a different way of approaching it. And in doing so, it needs to be understood that either they have the latitude to do it the way that they particularly do it and approach it, or that there's a key and common understanding that this has to be done a certain way because of the interests and the nature of the partnership. I think there might be 2 folks in the waiting room still. Yes. So any thoughts or points related to this definition? Does this capture accurately, do you feel like, what you are thinking about when you think about collaborations or partnerships? Is there anything I may have left out or that should be addressed here? Feel free to just unmute and chime in if that's the case.
I think you're on the right track from my standpoint, Matt.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. I appreciate it.
I agree as well.
Okay. Thanks, Juliet. Great. So when we're talking about partnerships, and we want to think about, like, what are the components of that partnership? So we've talked a little bit about in past sessions about levels of values and why those are critical. So this is drawn out of a model that shows, like, what are the components that make for successful partnerships. So it's just good to briefly check in on this. So on the bottom line, what we're seeing is a foundation that's built in fairness, respect, care, and honesty. Those are all really easy things to say, but not always easy to achieve. So of course we would agree that things should be fair within partners, but the reality is that different organizations come with different strengths. You may have a very well-funded organization, or one that's been established and has a track record of a lot of work, and then a new organization that comes in, and it's hard to apply the same concepts in a partnership. Even thinking about let's say there was a partnership formed around gender equity, and you had 2 big organizations that have been around for a long time and a smaller organization. When the media comes around to talk to those groups about that, the tendency is that they would probably talk more and get more play for the larger organizations. Similarly, those larger organizations might have dedicated staff or teams that are able to maximize and go out and get lots of media attention because that's, that they're more robust. They've got, a more of a focus. So how do you balance that level of fairness? And some of it really needs to be thinking about what does everybody bring into the table and what is everybody able to participate and contribute into the partnership? And then similarly, what can't they do? So thinking about how we kind of pick apart our own organizations honestly helps them to determine how we can manage that. If we're walking in and saying, hey, we want to make sure that one of our objectives and our outcomes as a smaller organization among those two larger organizations is to leverage our profile, is to get ourselves in this space, then maybe part of the partnership as a way of managing fairness says, anytime we talk to the media, we all have to be there. Like it has to be 3 people or 3 organizations being represented in this discussion so that we can manage a little bit more of fairness. There has to be respect. Respect is, again, a very easy thing to say, but it doesn't always hold up unless we kind of pick it apart very specifically. So understanding from each partner, what does that respect mean? What does it consider? What does it allow us to bring to the table? What do we need and what are our values that need to be respected? And that can mean from respected based on what we've already achieved. It can be respect based on a member of the partners. It could mean even the way that we're considered sometimes and how that is managed. And that breaks down sometimes even day to day. I may have shared this in one of the earlier sessions, but I remember in one of the teams I was working in, we had a conflict that arose just based on the fact that one person the meetings were always in the mornings. And one person was really like that person, they were up at 4, they had 2 cups of coffee by the time we sat and met. They were in their mode. They were running on all 5 pistons. And the other person, they kind of came into the morning as reluctantly. Their time to shine was in the afternoon, the evening. And in those sessions, how one person would come in and address the other and bring things fair just didn't give the same level of attention and what one perceived as respect. One person was told, hey, slow down. We'll get to that. When they had been thinking about it, preparing for it, ready for it. And so what they brought to the table, they felt like this didn't designate the most respectful scenario. It needs to be attended to. We have these issues that happen within our own organizations. It's quite likely that those types of challenges and circumstances need to be considered even more so when you're bringing organizations with different cultures, different backgrounds, different orientations together. So it's a key point of attention. Care. Again, I think that's the whole point of being intentional is what I think. Making sure that you're treating this with the right level of care. So how do we tend to our follow-ups? How do we ensure that we've met our goals? If there are delays, how do we ensure that people know what those delays are and how they can be managed? And then openly and honestly, that's that importance of when I'm giving information, I'm not cherry picking what information I give you, or I'm not giving you a bill of goods that is not accurate. So honesty becoming another key point of the foundation. So with that level of foundation rooted in values that should be common among those organizations, we then see what are the points and components that make a good partnership. So co-creation. Co-creation, again, a little bit easier to say than it is necessary to achieve, meaning though that the partners should have investment, ownership, and the ability to put in their ideas so that whatever the solution, the objective, the key part of the partnership, not only what its objective is, but how it's going to be achieved, that should be contributed to and managed through a collective. That doesn't always mean, and sometimes partnerships have one person that generally does those, and then they get the chance to weigh in and put their stamp of approval on it. It may be that there are 2 more active organizations than, say, the other groups. That still is okay. It just means that people feel like they've had a chance for their input to be respected, valued, and considered. And then once they've made a decision, they've had the chance to say, yes, I agree to that. So building ownership is key. Partnership, communication, ongoing communication, and building in mechanisms that ensure that communication. So regular team meetings or group meetings, regular sessions, using project management software. I think Stefan may talk a little bit about some of that, but ensuring that throughout the process, from our beginnings to our middles to our completion of whatever the objective or program we're talking about, that there's built-in systems that are not just one-way communication, but two or multiple levels of communication, so that everybody feels like they not only understand what the requirements and agreed upon actions are, but also that when things have changed or if they see something new in the environment, they have a mechanism to put information back to the group so that it can ensure its completion to the satisfaction of all the partners. Commitment. Commitment again becomes that concept that it's a lot easier to talk about we're going to do something than to make sure that it happens. You have to ensure that there are timelines, that there are allocated investment of resources, that there are designated people and point persons within each organization to attend that there are pathways to bring the information from whatever the partnership might be into the subsequent realms of whatever that organization might be. So if you're having a meeting or you're working on a program or an event with a bunch of other organizations, you got to make sure that information, what needs to happen, what the expectation, and what any challenges or successes might have happened, come back to your team, come back to your board, go out to your audiences. So if everybody understands what their required commitment might be, then you're going to have a greater chance for success. And then continuous review, understanding that the world is a moving platform. Your organization is a moving platform. Other organizations do that. And I simply say that things in our worlds can change very often. We've experienced this very much in this last month, where what government has decided has changed our plans. What our funders may require has changed our plans. What our partners are going through has changed our plans. Not drastically, but those little subtle changes require us with limited resources to make those changes. And I would expect that all of our organizations have that similar circumstance. Things outside of our organization may change. Even things internal to our organization may change. Staff members may change, skill levels may grow, access to information may change. And so as this process is going forward, if everyone has a continual process of reviewing, where are we? How are things going? Are they going based on our expectations? Were those expectations reasonable when we set them? Do we know things differently at this point? You're going to tend this. So that process of care is going to be obvious, because you're going to tend this partnership based on our long-term potential success and grounding it in what's going on in our environments, in our organizations. And that ultimately forms us with what we see as equitable partnerships, which would be a very important thing to be able to go back and say, why did we contribute? Because it did meet our goals and achievements. I'd love any thoughts on this model. Does it make sense? Does it seem a little too simplistic? Have you had experience with any of these areas that might be valuable for us to understand as a group?
Hi, Matt.
Hi.
I think a question would, I think it's really great points of what you're talking about, and especially when you're saying, with the gaming as an example, where, it just hadn't been conveyed yet. And going back to scheduling and trying to get everybody together in the same mindset when, everyone's so busy, but just making sure that we're all on the same page consistently. So I think one question is there like a simple and almost like a questionnaire or survey that you can take internally as an organization to first understand where everybody is at, just from a goals and objectives perspective, but then also touching on what you said, level of commitment, how much time they have. Like, is there a way that there's a template or a format that can, we can easily implement to say, let's try and get all of this information into a centralized document. And then that way we can analyze it as a group and go, oh, wait, I didn't realize that this is how much time you actually have available, or, these are the specific days or times that, don't work for you, without having to kind of spend a lot of time going through that process, I guess, is a question I have.
So that's a great point and a great question. Yes, there are what they call partnership assessments, and they can be really expansive, and they can also be very basic. I've given us a little bit later in the presentation a bit of a grid that we can use to kind of determine, looking at more from objectives. But to your point, capacity for partnership is a really important thing to assess. And so I will look back at some of the things that I've done. There was one or two that I have used in past that were very simple. And then there's some more complex ones. So I will make a point to see if I can share some with the group. So that may be a resource, but I think that's a key point, understanding and giving a chance to assess. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but having a tool is a very valuable component. So that's a great point. And I don't know if anybody else has seen a tool like that, but this is also a place where people can share that. So I'm seeing a question from Stephanie. Matt, what if an organization wants to partner, but it lacks integrity? It has no real base or substance. So I think that also goes to Juliet's point, is that before you would want to partner, you really need an accurate sense of what another organization is bringing to the table. You can use your own, common sense to assess that, but having a tool or a measure could be very effective to say, do you meet these certain criteria? And in some ways, it's what we all have also experienced when we're applying for a grant. The grant will say, usually up front, here's the criteria. If you don't meet these criteria, don't even worry about going forward. You need to be in existence longer than 3 years. You need to be, officially registered. You need to have a board, and your board needs to have a policy that says that they don't get any money if the organization, folds. Whatever those things are. Those are sometimes questions that you'll see. You should also be able to see from your standpoint with great assurance that an organization you're working with has the substance or the integrity within it. At that point, though, and I'll also talk a little bit about when we develop relationships. I have a bit of a system we can use to consider. It also is understanding that this is a learning process, and through your learning process, you should be able to gain information, whether it be formal information or informal information, through the learning process. And that showing up to sign on the dotted line in the first time you meet with an organization might be moving too quickly. And that was one of our takeaways from the gaming board discussion, is we came forward as what we understood to be a stable and organized organization. They did the same. And in our conversations, we got super excited about what we could have done. And we didn't share with them the process that, guess what? This is an initial preliminary discussion. We haven't checked back with our board, and we need to understand ways that before we can commit to anything, that we would need to do that. That would have given at least a context that if this article came out, they better understood it instead of it being totally blindsided. And similarly, we could have been working with our organization to say, hey, guess what? Here's the organizations we're courting coming up. Here's one, and we'll let you know what the course of that discussion is. In retrospect, it was a busy time. It was hard to figure out when we would have done that. However, the lessons learned are, if we were more intentional and took a little bit more time, we might have been able to garner a certain result. And that's also something to remind us, is that sometimes the opportunity seems to loom so large and so soon that we quickly form and we work on things, but it doesn't mean that we're going to be able to sustain that. And I think we've seen that in the instance of lots of groups rallying to respond to crises like COVID or the different hurricanes that happen and affect us. Usually we come together, and in the short term, we're doing some great work, but how many of those partnerships really sustain? So being more attentive and establishing that things like integrity and fairness and respect and care and honesty are a part of the mix and are prioritized and are specifically identified as requirements can help us to make sure that the investment of our time will pay off the way we want it to. Stephanie, did that speak to your point?
Oh, yes. You hit the nail right on the head.
It sounds like you may have had some experience in this.
Yeah. Be quite honest, when we talk about honesty and integrity, you don't just do things for media or attention, everything you do, I feel like it should be done. I mean, I might sound cliche, but to the honor and glory of God. You understand? And that's so really push you forward in all of this, because without him, we basically are nothing.
Well, and what's funny too is by paying attention to that concept of integrity or respect or fairness and having conversations around those or setting them as expectations, you also realize that it's hard. People make a lot of assumptions. We've been approached often by groups who are really just trying to further their particular individual agendas, because they think that's what we're doing it for. Like that's what they think. Well, this is the pathway to individual success, and like, okay, well, I guess we need to give you better information on who we are and why we are driven and doing that. So you do see lots of different folks out there, but I think your point is a good one. If you set that tone early, it prevents you from going too far down the line with someone that may not be the right partner for, or organization may not be the right partner for yours.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great points, both. I see a few folks that have also joined us. Felicia and anybody else that I'm adding? Felicia, do you want to take a quick minute and just introduce yourself so everybody in the room knows who you are?
My name is Felicia McBride, and I'm with the Bahamas Resilience Center.
Great.
Yes. My program and partnership manager will be signing on shortly.
Okay.
I have to step out for a minute to see a client.
Okay. Thank you. We appreciate you joining us for the time. All right. So with this as a foundation that we can agree to and think, again, if we pay attention to these areas, we'll be better, more successful. So this then becomes, how do we determine what kind of a partnership we would like? And so I cut this from a research paper that I had read a while ago, but it stuck with me, because anytime you apply these kind of structures, it helps you to get your mind around what potentially a partnership is. And when we say the word partnership, it has so many potential applications. The next slide, I'll show examples of what partnerships are, but this shows 4 indices. And on the axis, one is going from formal to informal, and the other goes on the axes of accountability, going to mutual accountability and separate accountability. So when you're looking at different types of partnerships, the first premise is that there are those that can be very, very informal and those that are very, very, very formal. Meaning that if they're informal, they aren't built out around a lot of specification. They don't have a lot of particular requirements. Maybe there's no documentation that indicates this level of partnership. It's more based on a mutual understanding or a collective understanding. We may manage by a concept or an idea or an objective or a particular event, to then being very formal, where there actually are legal components, where we've done some things to jointly come together and establish what this partnership is with great specificity. So that could be a document like a memorandum of understanding. It could be a merger of different organizations. What Juliet and her group are working on looks like it has components of not only a strategic alliance, but also potential mergers where one organization is taking the lead for the name of that project, but also having other contributors that are coming in with different aspects and responsibilities. So that level of there's a range, a spectrum of formal to informal accounts for the fact that you can have many versions of what partnership are, but understanding what they are, what the parameters are important. Similarly, on the other axis, which is accountability, you can also think about levels of accountability, meaning when we're kind of setting this to separate accountability, meaning you are accountable within your organization and your portion of that organization, that portion of the partnership, to mutual accountability, meaning that we are holding each other and we are managing a certain level of expectation that is required amongst this partnership. So in a mutual accountable formal type of a partnership, you see examples like a fully integrated merger. Our organization has been absorbed by your organization. We have very legal and strong measures that indicate the level of partnership, and we also have clear indicators of responsibility and accountability within that partnership because we're the same legal entity. We also see things where there are joint partnerships. Maybe folks use a common space or have a common particular event or something that we're working on towards a joint partnership. Maybe a funder will fund 2 or 3 organizations that are working on the same particular project. So they each have a responsibility. They've each received funding, and there actually is a responsibility amongst each of them to continue to move that forward because there's a very strong and legal requirement for them to achieve what they're doing, and they've committed to doing that. To even having what is a strategic alliance that may outline very specifically what are everybody's roles and clearly identify what each is responsible for, and then even talk about implications if you don't meet that level of responsibility. So that can be the mutual accountability formal indice. To the reverse of that being those informal partnership levels with levels of separate accountability, where we can be an informal network. We are all the not-for-profits that exist in Cat Island. You know, that's what we have in common. As such, we want to work together. We want to keep ourselves involved. When jobs come up, we like to, or career opportunities come up, we like to keep each other abreast, or you know, talk about how jobs might be identified or filled. And when things relate to our community, we like to get together to make sure we talk about it. Very loose, nothing in value. I mean, the value on it is still critical, but it is not defined where there's exact and specific requirements or recognitions. Then even looking at committees, we're all on a matter of committee. When we get together for the committee, we all have a responsibility of meeting those specific committee goals as individuals, but our organizations are still going to do their own thing. We are accountable to make sure that we come to the table as a committee with certain requirements, but that doesn't alter what our organization's expectations are. It's just that we're participating in something. Or a coalition, again, with an understanding that there is an external thing that we're all working on, but we're not bound to each other. If we decide to be in, then we're in. If we don't, we can also back out. And there's not a specific requirement or legal tie to what that is. Portia, thank you, Portia. Portia had to step away, but we will make sure we get the resources to you as well. Sorry. Any thoughts around this kind of a structure? Does that help you to formalize or think about maybe partnerships that you're in or ones you're considering? Or is it a little too sciencey in its way?
Well, Matt, I think it's really helpful. I like the structure, and I think it makes sense. Particularly as relates to your own organization and what you are actually doing. Because if we are, if we are bound by certain policies or legal policies, we know that an informal partnership with an agency would definitely not work for us, who, has no sort of policies in place or any real structure. So we know that for sure, those are the kind of agencies or partnerships we cannot connect with.
Right. I would imagine that your organization, right, would have that right in that right box, filled up a lot. It'd be lots of formal partnerships, not as many informal.
Yeah.
Right. At the same time, a smaller organization or one that maybe doesn't have the same kind of resources might have a lot of the informal, but only the resources to invest in maybe one or two formal partnerships. So it also, to your point, it allows you to kind of understand the portfolio of what you could take on and how you could commit to it. So I think that's a really good application for your specific organization.
Yeah.
Other folks? Jerry, any thoughts about this?
It seems straightforward. I saw a glimpse of the next slide, so I'm looking forward to seeing those types. But so far, so good.
Okay. All right. Well, then I will go ahead and jump to the next slide because my big clumsy fingers have already tipped the chart. So. So the types of collaboration, and this is not the only ones, but these are the examples of the types of collaborations that we've seen, as well as other ones that we might be there. So they go from the very formal to the very informal. So formal partners, there is a financial commitment. We've agreed that we are all going to put X amount of money in, and we're going to make sure that that's there. So we had a partnership during COVID, a social enterprise that was called the Living with COVID Coalition. And the coalition originally was organized as a way for lots of groups to come together and work on making sure that as COVID was now there, that there were resources, tools, education, and things that would facilitate people becoming, being able to move back into the world that under safer and productive ways. And there was a lot of, and the ideas when we first started were a lot, and there were a lot of different potential partners. As we move forward, the need was really established that there was a critical need, particularly in some of our smaller businesses, to get access to testing materials. There was a lot of folks who wanted to be able to test to make sure that their customers and their staff were safe, and that they had an ability to identify when there might be a potential risk. But the cost of getting the tests in was very expensive. So this group came together, and in that partnership, what ended up coming out is there were two or three very specific formal partners that helped to ensure that there was a partnership with a vendor, there was partnerships with a provider that made the mechanism, the online mechanism. There were organizations like ours that were coming in and saying, well, we could, lend the internal resources to try and manage it. And it had very, very specific components, and each piece was identified, but there was also a financial responsibility that bound a lot of these groups. Either this group needed to be able to meet this certain criteria in order to participate, or if money came in, it had to be distributed this way and that. And when that money was used, it had to go to a purpose that was benefiting a social cause. So it was really, really specific. And it had a lot of different pieces, and it required legal management. It meant it also couldn't be done just casually. There had to be thoughts and discussions around specifically if this worked, if it didn't work. So that was a very formal partnership. The partnerships that the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund would have, those are very formal partnerships. They have specific requirements, expected outcomes, and then financial support or requirements of reporting that go along with that. The next thing we have is memorandums of understanding. And memorandums of understanding are probably one of the most common things that orient and organize not-for-profit partnerships among not-for-profits. So they are a document that's kind of quasi-legal. You don't always need a lawyer to set up a memorandum of understanding. There are a lot of templates that you can use, and we will distribute a template in our next session that shows kind of how you would fill this out. And it usually is adapted to the particular jurisdiction you're in. So if you're working internationally, you might identify something that would be look like what legal terms or reference the legal structure of a particular country over other countries, or you might merge the two to say this reflects both what our country and your country are looking at. But since we're talking locally, we would talk about memorandums that look and respond to our legal system, but they allow it to be very specific as to what each part of the group is going to do. And it also usually in the memorandum of understanding specifies if there's a level of expectation or a breach of that expectation, what that would mean. And if it means a legal follow-up, how that pathway would go. So it's being a little more specific as to what a partnership might be. Networks of funded subcontractors. So you may get a grant. We were approached recently by somebody who got a grant from one of the European Union entities, and they were reaching out to see if a portion of that grant would be something we could do. So we would be subcontracted by that funder to be able to do a certain component. And there might be 3 or 4 groups that were subcontracted. So we're bound by working towards the same project, but we have our very specific aspect that has only been managed in the realm or the responsibility of those subcontracted organizations, really just your relationship specifically with the funder and what you're supposed to work on. So that's also a partnership, and there may be a collaboration across that or shared information, but it's not the same level or dynamic as if we were coming together to be equally, working on a particular organization. A project, sorry. Co-locations. Sometimes, and we know this, we've seen this often, and we really support this. Not-for-profits don't always have the resources to have your own independent office or event space or collaboration. Or co-location of a particular technology that you may utilize. So we've seen it out in NPCC where there's lots of different partners that do use that space. And among those people that use that space, there's a partnership, there's a collaboration, an understanding. It may not relate to the specific applications of their organization, but it would be about how they use that location, how they use that resource or that facility. This also might even apply. I've seen this somewhat recently where 2 or 3 organizations are using the same vehicle. So a vehicle has been made available by a funder, and that vehicle then can be used by a few different organizations that don't need a full-time vehicle, but they might need it provision or strategies, and they use that property in a collaborative way. So again, that's a potential type of a collaboration. Collaborations in response to RFPs. That's where a couple of groups will go forward and say, hey, we're going to pitch, we're going to respond to this request for proposal, and we're going to work collaboratively, and we understand what we will do. So it's not one organization that's made or secured the funding and come back to collaborations in terms of letters of support. Sometimes when you've asked for a grant or a fund or a funder, they may require that you have a letter of support from an organization you've partnered with. So I think when we presented to one of our funders in the last couple of years, they asked for a letter of support. We reached out to Life for Key Foundation, who we've done some programs with, and we've also received some funding, and they are comfortable to say, hey, we have worked with this organization. We feel their reputation is positive and that they have the capacity to achieve this goal. So that becomes another way of collaboration. Strategic coalitions, which is the forming of those coalitions. So you're coming together for a particular purpose. I think what Juliet and her group I think it's called, forget me, is an effort of a strategic coalition. Or coalition participation, which means there's an existing coalition and you're getting involved. You're getting involved as a part of an existing coalition. So your role within that. Memberships, you could be a part of an umbrella organization or an association where you have a collaborative understanding and you're assigned along as a membership. That membership may have certain requirements, but it also may have a certain level of understood benefits. So you're coming in and saying, well, you have to pay your membership fee and you have to come to these many meetings, but the collective or the umbrella group will make sure that they get you information and there'll be benefits that come from it. Community councils can be more loose types of collaborations. Community action groups, which tend to be very on specific projects and time limited. We can share training, so reciprocal training. So sharing, we do something really, really well here. Let's say the central bank does really good financial literacy training. And they also may then want to learn for their teams to understand better about how to manage themselves. So they may reach out to, say, ACE Diabetes or somebody that works on the nutrition side of things to say, come in and provide trainings. We'll give your team trainings on fiscal literacy and money management. You give us trainings on how to manage our health better. Those things can be beneficial. So there can be ways that we, on a non-cash way, bring forward our strengths or our resources to help the members of a partnership. Informal networks, again, that's just where we are aware that we're in the same community and we give each other a heads up when things happen. We draw upon each other in times of resources or advice or needs, and they're very important. Warm handoffs, which tend to mean that if we see somebody that would be related to your organization, might be an interest area, a funder, a potential beneficiary, or a partner, we might make sure and segment them and segue them towards you so that they understand that, we have a good understanding of you are as an organization, but you're going to do that, and we understand that you would do the same with us. So it's not formal, but it still has value. To then even getting down to service referrals. So we know you do a certain thing, you provide a certain project or program, we're going to be aware of that, and we're going to make sure we plug folks into, you have a literacy training in your community. So as we identify and work with a school group and we see folks are struggling with that, we're going to let them know, hey, you can go ahead and get a service beneficiary there. And those service referrals, because sometimes organizations, not-for-profits, do provide fees services for fees. They also can have financial incentives tied to it. So anybody that provides services this way, we're going to make a $10 donation to that organization. So there are even those types of mechanisms that can be less formal, but also driven to support that. So these are, again, not exhaustive, but a number of different types of collaboration. So as you start to think about how would we partner, what would it look like? Here are some ideas and ways that you can have very specific and strict, both formal and mutual accountable partnerships, as well as more informal and more separate accountable partnerships. So those are just a good range. Again, any thoughts or ideas related to these that I maybe have missed or questions on these?
No, they seem to be pretty on point, Matt. They seem to be in line.
Thank you. All right, next up. So when you're talking about why you're partnering or collaborating, it's also important to understand, like, what are the goals? What are your ultimate goals? So some of the 4 primary goals usually are related, though, under that sense of improving your capacity. So maybe within your members, maybe within the relationships that you manage, maybe within your organizational structures, or within your programs. So you got to know why you're doing it, and you got to be able to articulate that pretty clearly, not only to yourselves, your internal audiences, but externally. So if we're partnering, so for example, we are working with the wonderful team at the American Corner, and Dr. Walteria Tucker-Roll has an initiative they're working on that's called, it's a program they do called Deliberative Dialogue. And it's a really valuable resource, and one that we're going to try and plug into these trainings so that you can take advantage of it. But it's a way of bringing folks together. You get trained on how to lead a discussion that facilitates people having the experience of coming together on particular issues, exploring them philosophically, but also coming up with problem solving. And the benefit is that it gives those people that have experienced it also a greater level of internal skill when it comes to them managing conflicts, coming forward and contributing and doing beneficial. So for us, this was really valuable within our team to add on another level of skill. It was also very valuable for us to be able to have this skill that we could then bring to the audiences we work with in our civic education. So helping youth and community members to better understand and work around making their decisions on particular critical policies is really helpful for us. So the partnership we had for us came with two objectives, or two benefits to us: help our team to become better community organizers and facilitators and trainers. And then the second goal was, how do we help our programs to give our beneficiaries more tools so that they can be better at self-determination and involvement in the community and in governance. And so we had real clear understanding of what the goals were for us. So as you go forward in your collaborations, it's also important for you to be able to label, hey, what is the goal that we want? We understand that there are goals that are beneficial for the entire country or your geographic region, your community, your island, and that may be why you're benefiting it. But there also is important to identify specifically what are each organization's goals that benefit them, and then what are the collective goals that we all benefit from. And I'm going to show this first and then I'll go back to that. So for example, you'll see this as kind of a visual. Every organization is going to have their own specific goals, why they're partnering, that may not relate to anything valuable on the other side. So maybe organizations' goals, let's say this partnership is about building out a program that is going to help us to reduce levels of obesity and heart disease in the Bahamas. And all these four organizations have come together to build this program and participate. There's funding that's been attributed to this. They've identified a potential funder that can come and do this. Organization 1, Organization 2, 3, and 4 are all different types of organizations, but they all work in the space of, say, food security, nutrition, and poverty relief. They're common in that way. But Organization 1's responsibilities, goals, although they may find a lot of value in a collective goal, might really relate to, this is an opportunity for them to gain more visibility among audiences. Organization 2's goals might relate to the fact that we're seeing in Andros a huge need, and we need to make sure we bring resources back to Andros specifically. Organization 4's goals might relate to, they have a great program, but boy, they sure need funding. And with that funding, they need to be able to hire one more staff. And if they get one more staff, that will really let their organization start to fly. So their goal is get funding that allows them to bring in one more staff. Organization 3's goal is, let's say they're focused, they're working to ensure that there's a certain requirement they have to show their impact on food security, and they're organized around that. They've started and given a certain commitment. They've been doing work, and this would be the remainder of what would bring them to the goal that was outlined in their strategic plan. All four of those organizations have very specific reasons they're coming to this. At the same time, this running a program that is going to bring and reduce levels of obesity and heart disease down is going to be beneficial to all of them in different ways. And so this Venn diagram, this goal we're seeing, is it's also to understand really specifically what are the things that the organization's goals are that fall within that partnership circle that are beneficial to all, because that's where they can join. That's where they can benefit. And then what are the other goals that each organization is trying to achieve? And if all of the organizations understand that, then the way that they execute the partnership will be effective and beneficial to each of them in their own way, and will still contribute to a common objective that they've agreed upon. So this is kind of the model we're trying to get to. Not to say that everybody will be in the circle as much. Sometimes it might be that you're deep into the circle, and what you're doing that benefits your organization also is exactly in line with what the overall partnership goal is. And others, it might just be a little bit, but then that will also temper the expectation of how much an organization is and will participate in a level of partnership. So you may have partnerships where you're all in, and you may have partnerships where you're just a portion in, but you understand why, and all the other partners also understand why. That level of transparency is really beneficial. It helps you to determine how much energy and time you put into a partnership, what the return from that partnership should be, as well as what to expect from the other groups. And by doing so on the front end, you're going to be a lot better off as the partnership progresses and ultimately reaches its long-term objective. Is that any questions on that? So examples of different types of partnership goals, and again, these are just certain examples. Leveraging resources. None of us have enough funding or human resources to achieve this particular objective. So coming together, we're going to pool what we have and put it towards a dedicated and unique objective that we all will own and support, and hence this is the best way for us to be able to do that. We have, Stefan's team has the knowledge, I have the access, you have the funding, we all come together, and that's going to help to make sure that none of us is left wanting in trying to achieve an objective. We're going to pursue joint funding. We're going to reduce the potential costs. We've seen this before. So using a leveraged space or partnering on an event, we all, instead of running 3 separate events, we run one event. We use logistics of hiring one videographer, and we only have to feed people once, and we rent one venue, but we're able to use it in through 3 different ways, almost like a fair environment could benefit or reduce costs in a very way. Increasing the impact of our services, increasing our visibility, professional development and training, like the one we talked about that we're working on with the UB, improving our organizational structure, that can also happen. We're learning from different groups, and then political leverage. Coming together, this happened when we worked on the partnership to get freedom of information passed. 22 different private sector and not-for-profit organizations came together, and when you measured all of our audiences, it was an audience of over 50,000 people that were being represented. That helped to move passage of the Freedom of Information Act, and that was an incredible power. It was very hard for the government at the time to disregard that collective. They did a lot to try and disregard it, but it was harder to do that. So these are also reasons and partnership goals that would bring us together. I'm going to accelerate through the next ones because I want to make sure we get to Stefan's time. But feel free to unmute and chime in if there's something that I'm either going too fast on or missed in our discussions. So here's some concepts in terms of best cornerstones for solid partnership planning. This also comes from research. So the partnership should tie to your own organization's mission. You need to be able to show that this links to the thing you say you're supposed to be trying to achieve. It should tie in with your strategic planning. It shouldn't drive your strategic planning. It should tie into your strategic planning. If your whole plan is based on making this partnership work, that puts you in sometimes a potential liability if you don't have it steeped around what the arc of your particular organization might be outside of this partnership. Because if something happens in that partnership, it could potentially jeopardize your organization's success. Involving the board. This is the lesson I started talking about, making sure that the folks who are part of your governance also understand the trajectory and the goals and the objectives of the partnership is critical. It leverages their potential resources and interest and ownership, and it also minimizes the risk that they don't understand and put the brakes on something that you think you've already started to accelerate. Do partnership planning as a team. As a team is always going to benefit us. Working as individuals, sometimes we can move faster, but it doesn't mean we can move with the same level of substance. Making sure, and we all have to struggle with this. I want to make sure that every presentation we ever do talks about this because it's so critical. And it's hard, but involving the potential stakeholders and beneficiaries of whatever you're talking about as much as possible. Your volunteers, your beneficiaries, the groups that you work with, you want to have a good sense that they understand what this partnership is, and an understanding early enough in that if they have thoughts, reactions, solutions, or contributions, they can be factored in. Too often, just because we are moving so quickly with little resources, sometimes we don't have that mechanism. Surveys, focus groups, check-in points, using existing models or programs that you're working on to get people's ideas and thoughts about a partnership that's being considered can all help, whether they're formal like a survey or informal like a conversation with a group that or a person that might represent a particular stakeholder group that you trust. It's important to try and make sure that so you have the biggest bit of information possible that you can then bring forward in your planning. And then don't worry about developing a perfect partnership plan. These are, as I said, moving platforms. So sometimes perfect is the evil of movement. So trying to get it all right can inhibit you from going forward. So understanding that there is going to be some latitude, some changes, some things that maybe don't exactly line up shouldn't be the thing that prohibits you from moving forward as a partnership, as long as you see a commonality in values, an understanding on what the structures are, and an understanding of what the key objectives are. So I talked a little bit about the concept of relationships, and that partnerships are relationships, and as Stephanie talked about earlier, making sure that you take the time to figure out who's in the room and what they're about can be very helpful. So this is kind of a model that talks a little bit about exploring the partnership under the premise that it's like NPO dating. So when you think about developing a partnership, this is applied kind of concepts related to relationships. So in the first stage, playing the field. So this is like when you're first out there dating, you want to talk and meet and engage with a lot of groups. So if you build into the mechanism of how you operate your not-for-profit as an open space where you're talking to different groups that may have kinds of relevance, that helps you to build a bigger audience of who's out there. And then when you do see a partner, you have an understanding of who they are compared to others and what that looks like. We then think about, okay, stage two, you've met a bunch of people, you've talked to them, now you're starting to think about who might make that good option, who, if I want to achieve an objective, might be the right kind of partner. And you start to group folks, you start to apply a certain level of criteria. We work best with smaller organizations. We work best with organizations that are in the same geographic region. We work best with groups that might be more religiously oriented. We work best with groups that are focused on youth or are driven with kind of that spirit of the youth with, that's in their core as an organization. You start to understand what are the profiles that work best for you, and then you can start to develop a pool of potential partners that helps to translate. So then you have the falling in love stage. So you're starting to, let's talk about these initiatives. Let's talk about how what we're excited about. Let's flesh out some. We have some ideas, maybe some funding ideas out there, potential funding or an RFP we might work on. We see the government is moving forward with project in this area. We see that the need in our community is key, and we think that you might be somebody that we could work on. So you're starting to test out the waters there. That might be where an informal partnership starts, that you then can move maybe into a formal partnership. And realizing that sometimes as you go further, you realize this didn't work as well. We had a partnership early on with a group that was like, they were so excited for what we were working on. but they weren't able to really bring forward the resources. There was two really dedicated folks and they start their own organization. And unfortunately, after 5 or 6 times of thinking we were going to work on something, it fell away. They both got pulled into other things and it just didn't happen. That was okay, but at least it understood earlier rather than later that this thing wasn't going to materialize to be the kind of project we wanted. And then consulting, where you're really now, you're in a relationship, you're listening to each other, you're talking and thinking about what are the key things that are going to be critical. So that structure, after you've decided that, let's say in your dating phase, you're getting the values, do we have common values? Now you're starting to think about what are those concepts of partnership, what are the key objectives, the components that we need, and are you able to do that and provide that? So before we then decide that we're going to formalize, that's where that happens. Then the coupling is the approach, the solid discussions. We're working towards something. We're going to have common objectives. We have these objectives set, timelines, resources. We're moving through that. It's more formal. Commitment, you're now getting married. So what are the documents and the things and the specifications that need to be managed? And now we're union. This is when it works. This is the execution of the partnership. So when you think about that happens, if you think about a phase between you start dating and get married, it usually doesn't happen in one meeting. It usually doesn't happen over a week. How often have we, and I will take responsibility for us, moved really quickly to jump into a partnership? Because the need is there. I don't have a lot of time, and we don't want to. There's a deadline on a grant that we just discovered that's next week. Not to say that it won't happen, and sometimes you may need to, but recognize that those same things are things we need to consider, even if it's at an accelerated rate. We follow this pathway. It helps us to make sure that as we go through, we're going to have a better sense of it. So, Juliet, this isn't the specific chart you wanted, but it gives you a pathway for development of partnership that also allows us to get that specific information that you talked about. And I think paired this with an assessment, you might have a good system and tool. But in that way, it also is important to start to now take it to a tool. And so this is that tool that I've modified. It was a little bit more specific, but it's a very rudimentary way to say, what would be the potential collaboration? Like, this is, how do we clarify what our objectives are? And then how do we understand the benefits for our organization and the potential risks? And by benefits, these are the things that we feel like we can gain, that we can bring forward, strengths that we can now start to develop. But the risks also talk about, what would it cost us? What are the liabilities? What are the areas that we aren't as strong in each of these? So that as we then start to lay this out, and I just did this for 3, but you could do this for many, many organizations, it gives you a grid at a glance to see what are very clearly, what are each organization's objectives and goals? What are we gaining from that? And what will we ultimately require in our or I'm sorry, not require, but what ultimately will we have to overcome as a risk for our organization? So if we're working on a partnership that is going to require us being at something week after week, or doing a program in the community, if I only have 2 staff, then that's a potential risk. And that may also then say, this is maybe we need to make sure that somebody else has a full complement of staff and human resources that can bring forward, because otherwise this is a liability that not only is for that organization, but for the potential partnership. So this is, as I said, a grid. Between the last 2 slides, any thoughts? Do these seem to be relevant or applicable? Is there anything that you feel like we might want to add to these types of things?
No, I think it was great. Thank you, Matt.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Matt, it was good. I just realized we had the celebration that's at the dot, and that's a lot of things you said. It just clicked into a lot of things that we're working at. So thank you so much.
No worries. And a lot of this, again, you know, we all have done these and to many ways have probably done them very successfully. So just adding on a level of formal language or putting a system or thinking about it like a dating, whatever it might be, it helps us to say, okay, the things we do, let's verify the things we've done really well, put a check on that, and then say, okay, well, but this is an area where we do it. Because I will definitely say, and my team would commit to this, I go from first date to marriage really quickly. So making sure that there's a point in the stop in the middle to make sure that we check in, make sure all those things is also a really important tool for me. Sometimes we get it right, but there may be other times that using such a process would help us to measure that. So again, these are just some general tips. We'll go through these quickly. So as we work collaboratively, we want to define what success is together, not just depend upon what I think success is and you think success is. We want to make sure we clarify those roles, and that's continually ongoing. It may change. We want to be candid when things don't work or something, we're not okay with it, or a communication style rubs us wrong. Being honest and upfront with it is also critical. We want to take risks because this is risky stuff. If we could do it alone, we would have done that. So we have to put ourselves out a little bit and be able to put ourselves in somebody else's hands. We have to say thanks. I don't know what happened in the world, but thank you. And acknowledging folks and giving them praise sometimes falls away. Maybe because we all agree that we're on the same side and we know we think we're going towards it, but it also gains a lot of equity. It really reinforces those folks who we are also in our trenches, working hard, doing those things. And it conveys that concept, that value of respect. And then promote each other. Constantly thinking about how do we leverage and talk about each other positively when we're outside of our own circumstances. How are we supporting each other? How are we recognizing and giving each other the lift up? That is absolutely 100% critical. So those are just some general tips on how to manage that, and I'll share those resources. But I want to pause for a quick minute. Thank you, Stephanie. I want to pause quickly to also make sure that we load up Stefan's. Do you have yours on yours that you can take it, or should I try and put it on this?
You could. It'd probably be
okay. So I'm gonna shift it over to Stefan, who can start to introduce his, and I'm gonna go ahead and pull his training up. I might need to leave before the end of the session, so I apologize because I have to get from our offices, which are just east of Rawson Square, to the end of the island, and that's going to take me a little time. So I will just give my thanks to everybody for their input now, and then shift it over to Stefan so that he can start leading you up into project management.
The challenge is you're going to be carrying your computer with you?
No, I can leave it. Okay. Yeah, I'll just come back and get it.
Thank you for your patience. And this is a good little stretching opportunity as we come down the home stretch. But I will say I do feel this next segment is going to be very, very helpful.
Hi, Matt, are we supposed to hear you right now?
I will.
Go ahead, sir. You now are supposed to hear us. We just we just cut out. The internet was faulty there for a minute, so we just came back on. So sorry for the disruption, but I'm gonna put up Stefan's presentation, and then he's gonna step in for me. But thank you for the patience. Do I need to do anything from there? Or?
No, I think we should be good.
You got it, or should I stay? Should I just head back out?
I think we are good. If someone could just verify that everyone can hear me, I will get started.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr.
Yes,
Evans.
we can hear you.
Thank you.
I just like to point out he looks so much better than I am at this. That's right.
Okay, so let's see. So I think that the information that Matt shared was very, very helpful and very timely, even from the perspective of working internally within the organization. We know that these concepts of collaboration come up often, but it's so difficult because we have so many things that are happening. As Matt said, we were just in Grand Bahama yesterday, and so doing some things on the ground with some of the schools, and then trying to get back and make sure that we were prepared for this. I am definitely fortunate enough to have a two-person team who could assist me with some things, and I have certainly been in positions where that luxury just doesn't exist. So I believe that a lot of the practical steps toward creating better partnerships and looking at what they look like from a perspective of shared and individual goals is definitely a stepping stone. But I think what becomes really important is understanding some standard language when it comes to project management. This section will likely touch on some things that many of you are already familiar with, but the opportunity to sit with this and to look at this in the context of what we're talking about and to just agree on some terms, because there are many terms that describe different things. Sometimes we use the same word differently. Having that shared language, there are many benefits to that. So I'm going to go through a few things. Let me just make sure that that I can see. Give me one quick second to make this computer co-host just in the event that anyone comes in, so I will be able to let them in. And now get started. Okay. So we wanted to talk a little bit about looking specifically at forming objectives, but forming objectives is, of course, a part of what is formally known as as project management. And project management, a helpful definition that I found that I think kind of hits the nail on the head, is the application of processes, methods, skills, knowledge, and experience to achieve specific project objectives according to, or within rather, agreed parameters. And there are a few things at a very general basic level that you can look at. I'm not going to get into all of this too much right now, but we would definitely be more than happy to share some of our resources around the fundamentals of project management for anyone that needs them. But there, in the process of project management, oh yes, definitely, we could definitely share this information. But in the process of project management, we look at a few processes. There's initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and closing. Initiation speaks basically to a lot of what Matt was talking about, the process of understanding what it is that you would like to achieve and establishing the boundaries and parameters that you will be working within, and very importantly, establishing borders and boundaries to what exists beyond your actual capacity. Because a lot of time in the project management process, we put ourselves in a snag when we don't take into consideration our organizational and personal capacity to actually execute against the thing. And so it's really important, it's really important to understand, what are my boundaries, what are my resources, and what am I able to do? And then when we begin to look back at that partnership model, that's when we can begin to think, well, what capacity exists within other like-minded or similar mission organizations to get a particular thing done? When it comes to the planning, this is really important because this is where we set tangible goals and objectives, and we look at outputs and outcomes and some of the language that is really important to be shared within and outside of the organization among key stakeholders and partners. And I'll touch on a little bit why I feel like that in particular is a really important process to undergo. Execution is the part that most of us are really good at and most passionate about, because this speaks to actually doing the things that we've set out to do. And then a very important thing is monitoring and control, making sure that when we go off track, we take the necessary corrective actions to get back on track, or we pivot in terms of what it is that we want to achieve measured against what we can actually do given the circumstances. As we all know, planning almost never happens first and foremost, but in the last several years, we've definitely learned that circumstances change in a way that creates an even larger gap in terms of our sphere of control. So there are often things that we can control, how we respond, what we commit to, the work that we get done, who we partner with, but those are all limited based on what is going on in the environment. So something can happen within your organization. You could lose a member of staff. There could be a natural disaster. Something could happen among your partners. An organization could cease to exist, or get involved in something problematic publicly that makes the partnership strained or more complicated. So when we talk about monitoring and control, these are the mechanisms in our process of work that allow us to basically continue to get to the bigger goal, but pivot as need be, or keep things on track as to the best of our ability. And another important thing to understand is the process of closing that is sometimes a process of transition from one project to the next. When we talk about projects versus programs, which I won't get too much into, one of the fundamental differences is a program or a programmatic operation is something that's likely to go on perpetually, and a project does have a start and a finish point. So, as I said, many of us may already be aware or familiar with this information, and project management language may be new to some, but having that shared understanding that even if it's something that needs to be ongoing, that it should be structured as a project, is something that becomes really important, because when we begin to look at the project management triangle, every effectively managed project needs to have these three things that ensure that it is a good quality project, and that is budget, a timeline or schedule, and a scope. So when it comes to budget, of course, we know everything that we do incurs some level of cost. It could be programmatic, administrative, operational, or even incidental costs that may not necessarily be as obvious or set in stone at the start of the project. So laying out a budget is important for any project that you do, whether or not you have the funding. It is really important to have a budget, a qualified budget that makes sense and that lines up, that is as cost effective as possible with what your goals are. But when we look at the scope, really important thing to understand when it comes to capacity, your scope is going to tell you what you will and what you will not do within the project. I think that sometimes, and we're definitely guilty of this as an organization, as are many organizations that I've worked with in the past, we don't necessarily stop when we need to stop or revisit our project plan, because it is okay where you have the resources to add to the objectives of a project. But being able to say, even though you may have the money, for instance, you may not have the human resources to execute a thing, or even though you may have more people who have a little bit more time, you may not necessarily have the funding to do a thing. These things all work together to create a project of quality. And then timeline or schedule gives you a definitive idea of when something needs to be done by, and that is absolutely pertinent to the success of any project. As Matt would have alluded to, if you have any comments or questions, you can feel free to raise your hand or chime in at any point, but I'm gonna keep going. So what I want to talk specifically about is one of the very focal concepts when it comes to project management, and that is the setting of objectives. I think many of us have heard of the SMART model, and I feel like sometimes we call our goals SMART goals. From our perspective, it's actually more important that your objectives are SMART and your goals do have a bit of wiggle room to be slightly more broad, while they do share some things in common. And I'll touch on some of the differences between your goals and objectives. But in the process of project management and forming clusters and partnerships with other organizations, having SMART objectives is incredibly important. The acronym stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. And specific is simply stating what you do using action words or verbs. And I think that this is really important, that one of the ways to stay on track is to make sure that your objective either begins with a verb, which is one of the safest ways I've found to write an effective objective, or definitely has a verb very near to the beginning of this actual sentence. When it becomes measurable, we're looking at the metrics and providing an actual way to evaluate. So you wouldn't just say that you're going to do a thing to cause a change, but what is that change, or how much of that thing are you doing? And There are smaller levels that we'll touch on a little bit. So your objective doesn't have to say every single task or thing that will be done. But when you talk about being measurable, you probably want to look at one of the more relevant metrics that you're measuring for and add that into your objective statement. So if that is a specific amount of people that you want to reach, a specific amount of policies, for example, that you want to influence, or even naming them, that creates a measurable objective. When we look at achievable, this goes right back to staying within scope and within timeline. If you are representing a small organization or a small sub-team within an organization, you don't want to set objectives that are too lofty, or if they are lofty long-term objectives, you want to make sure that you tackle them within measure and take a chunk at a time. Relevant means that it makes sense within your job or organization's function, and it improves what you are doing in some way or the other. So if relevant is somewhat of a challenge to nonprofit organizations in particular, because when we get access to funding, a lot of times what we end up doing is sort of jumping through hoops to make sure that our donors are satisfied. And sometimes that sacrifices the relevance of what we're working on to the mission and vision of the organizations that we represent. In the long term, that actually does become more problematic because you're working and you're sustaining an operation, but it's very easy to slide into mission or vision creep, which is when your operations or function begin to exist outside the realm of what it is that you hope to achieve. This makes partnerships even more complicated, because if I have an understanding that some of you on this call, based off of the descriptions of your organization, are doing a particular thing, that's what's going to draw me into wanting to work with you, wanting to allocate resources, wanting to share in fundraising initiatives. And so when that operation doesn't line up, it creates really chaotic and confusing environment for all of your stakeholders, your partners, your staff, members of your team, yourself, your donors, because one donor may want a very specific thing that's outside of the realm of what you do. But when other donors, for example, see that you're moving off track, it can very much damage your reputation and become really problematic. And then the last thing is time-based. Even though all of us intend to be around and do the wonderful work that we do forever, for continuity purposes, it is really important to take everything that you do in stride and to move one step at a time. Moving in time-bound bites toward a bigger picture goal also creates an environment where you are better serving yourself, members of your team, where donors see a more realistic investment opportunity for their organization or company or foundation, where members of the public can feel a little bit more plugged into what you're doing, because when we get into our spaces that we're subject matter experts, it feels like everything is so straightforward and easy to understand because we eat, sleep, and breathe our mission. But we do have to understand that it isn't always as easy for folks to follow through with some of the things that we have going on when we take it in really, really large chunks of time, or really large chunks at a time. So I want to give a few examples of looking at goals versus objectives. Now, there are many ways to do this, and I will say that there are several project management models, and you would want to find the one that works for you. So this exercise is just about having a basic shared understanding. Different organizations, different countries will call some of the terms that we're sharing and will share by different names. So when we look at goals and objectives, I have a few examples of corresponding ones. Some are based on our work, some are based on the concept of clustering. So the first that I have here looks at a goal of creating a better landscape of governance, or for governance, through citizen empowerment. This does correspond with one of our pillars, or some of the work that we do here at org. But when we speak to an objective that is specific, that is measurable, achievable, that is relevant and time-based, that may look a little more like to run a 3-part citizens education campaign across 10 islands that improves citizen engagement by the end of 2023. It can be a little cumbersome to get it together. And with practice, for those of you that are actively in project management roles, it does get easier, and it may be something that comes to you pretty easily, but it takes time to form an effective objective. That's kind of catchy. So we can look at these two statements and we can have a conversation with someone at that goal level, and it might inspire them, but it may not necessarily tell them how that thing is going to happen. So it is really important to be able to do both and to practice and spend time to revisit some of your objective statements to make sure that there are accountability measures against every letter in the SMART acronym. So looking at this first one, if we run a 3-part citizen education campaign, that already tells us a little bit about what this project looks like. It will entail 3 things. Across 10 islands, this is our goal to be representative and inclusive. So we're making sure that as big as a goal that might be, we have a year, if we're talking the year of 2023, to reach communities or citizens across 10 islands. That might not be something that is achievable by certain small organizations. We do actually have a mode of operation and a team, a small team, but a team that's dedicated specifically 3 people to this one objective. So we do have the capacity to run a project like this, but everyone may not, particularly if you have a dual role or a minimum dual role and are busy doing other things. You may not be able to go to that many places in the space of 1 year. So a second example of something that we do, and this isn't necessarily directly from a strategic plan, but these are just sort of related to some of our actual objectives, is to combat corruption through tackling key pieces of legislation. So that is a goal, and in itself, very lofty. Corruption is a global challenge that just exists because of the way that governments are formed and structured. It's not because anyone is particularly bad or evil, but when you have influence and control over shared resources, it opens the door for corruption. So there are things that you have to do. But that is such a big picture that it should be boiled down into an objective that may look like to research and promote the benefits of ombudsman, Freedom of Information, and Integrity Commission legislation during the current legislative agenda. Now, for us, those terms are pretty big. So your objective language may need to be translated when you do present it to certain stakeholders, but to our donors that are interested in the work that we do, something like that will make perfect sense. It will give them a complete understanding of what it is that we're tackling based on what they're familiar with. And so if we look at these specific bits of legislation in our objective statement, not only does it identify how many bits of legislation we may be tackling, which is 3, it outlines very succinctly what those 3 things are. And if you're familiar with our structure of government, then you will understand if we say during the current legislative agenda, that makes it time-based. So that tells us that it's probably going to happen within this 5-year period. So that actually extends over a longer period of time because that legislative agenda lasts that period of time. So all of these things set us up to be successful. We may go on to structure that year by year or look at different parts of a campaign. The first year is all about research on these 3. The second year is all about the promotion, because those 2 words give us specific lines of work that we will be carrying out. And I hope that everybody is still following along. It's not necessarily complex, but like I said, it could be a little cumbersome and tedious. And this is where we build our own capacity to be functional. So taking time out to spend with your objectives and to spend with your mechanisms of project management becomes all the more important. Because while we can never be good at everything, having these sorts of general skills and knowledge is going to help to push you forward. So the final one, I wanted to use an example. This is hypothetical, although some of this is happening. That looks at what an objective related to partnership, collaboration, or clustering might be. So I have to create a better landscape for disaster response in civil society or among nonprofit organizations. The objective that we used was to create an NGO disaster response committee that mobilizes organizations across all islands ahead of the 2023 hurricane season. It may have been more realistic to put 2024, but let's just pretend like this is last year or the year before, for example, because that's a big undertaking, right? It requires a lot of work and a lot of effort. But once again, the example of being specific is the fact that this thing has a name or a name that is put forward. Maybe it will change, but we understand that this is a committee on disaster response that is sort of constituted by non-governmental organizations. So we're not guessing who these folks are or what it is that they're going to be doing. Once again, you have a little bit of demographic information in the succinct statement that talks about across all islands. And then you have your time base when we're looking at ahead of the 2023 hurricane season. To be honest with you, as challenging as creating a comprehensive plan may be, it can be pretty difficult to form very specific statements that talk about what you want to do in forming your objectives. But this is actually a really good starting point for any planning process, whether it is an individual organization or across organizations, because once you have this, it makes it all the more easy to continue on with creating a plan, creating a budget, and looking at your scope. So I want to give a few examples of what that looks like. And it gets a little bit easier, personally at least, I could say it gets a little bit easier once you've taken the time out to really consider what my objective is. And I do want to stick a plug here that I think using that specific language is very important, because sometimes we use words like objective loosely, and then we come into a room or a group of people and they may be expecting what we see in our objective column, but we're still talking at a very vision or mission or goal level, and that can create a bit of confusion. So being sure that you established what we're actually talking about when we say goal, objective, mission, vision, or as you will see in this next slide, something like an output. For each of the objectives, I gave a few simple examples of what outputs, or sometimes we call outputs deliverables, may look like. And because those objectives are specific, it was really easy to throw out some ideas. The first objective is actually something that we're doing. So I just used examples from our Active Citizens Bahamas project that we are running right now. But if the objective is to run that 3-part education campaign on 10 islands by the end of this year, 3 outputs of that campaign are a national outreach series where we are reaching out to groups and just talking and inspiring and empowering people. The other is a community focus group series where we're looking specifically at collecting information from members of existing communities. And then our Advocacy 101 handbook that further empowers the engagement of citizens in creating change in their own spaces. So then you could give descriptions and things that you hope to achieve, milestones for each of those. For our second objective that looked at anti-corruption, we know that we have 3 bits of legislation that we would be touching on. So some of our outputs may be a listing of what our policy priorities are, a benchmark document for each piece of legislation, meaning that we just do some research as is a part of the objective and say, these are the best practices for any freedom of information law that we've collected, looking at examples from the region or internationally. And then last, if we're talking about promotion, how are we doing that? Maybe through an outreach campaign around anti-corruption. And ours is called the Integrity Campaign. So this is somewhat of an actual project that we've worked on over several years as well. Now, this last one that was I was a little more aspirational, that looks at creating a disaster response committee. Some of those outputs might look like creating a custom model and policy document. So a document that says, what does this cluster look like? What are the organizations that we're looking to attract? What categories do they fall in? Who's working on food security? Who's working on clothing? Who's working on housing? Who's working on access to fresh and potable water? who's working on reconstruction. And we may not even do all of these things ourselves, but the objective allows us to begin to look more critically at what needs to happen. And maybe it goes broader than NGOs. Maybe this fits into a national framework that also includes government and the private sector. Another example of an output could be an annual NGO disaster response strategy. So when you talk annual now, you're looking at the differences that will take place from a year-to-year basis, while an overall policy document may be something that's revisited, but is more static. And then you have MOUs, memorandums of understanding between organizations. So we all sign off to say that this is what we will do, this is how we participate, and this is how we contribute. What I want to make clear, though, is that what paves the way for any of this to happen is having effective and strong objectives by organization, by partnership, by cluster, and whatever your mode of operation actually is. And the last thing that I would like to highlight is when you have effective and strong objectives that allow you to produce outputs or deliverables like this, it makes your projects and partnerships more palatable, because each of these has 3 bullet points. Maybe every organization within a partnership or a cluster can take one of these outputs based on the objective, so we all know that we're working together to achieve this particular thing by this particular date. When we all on the same page, it just creates a better landscape for us to function and to be effective. Now, the sort of moving into just one particular area of execution. And are there any questions? So I'm going to shift into one specific line of execution that I think we cannot go without talking about if we're having a discussion about forming objectives in the context of clusters and partnerships, and that's work planning. But I wanted to pause to see if there were any questions or comments on what I would have shared so far. And if we are good, I would carry on. Okay. So I will take silence to give consent. So looking at work planning.
I think it's doing really great. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Matt. Much appreciated. So looking at work planning and management, I found this really nifty definition that describes work planning as a process whereby employees, in collaboration with their work unit and their employer, well, they say employer representative, but employer, prepare a plan of action for a given period of time. The resulting work plan defines goals, objectives, and activities to be accomplished during the given period of time. So work planning is when you take your objectives that may come and your goals that may come from a strategic plan, which is a bit higher level and doesn't necessarily go into what needs to be done specifically and by when. And you begin to look at right down to some of the tasks that need to be achieved within a given time frame. Understanding this is really important. What I wanted to give, though, was an example of how using technology can help with work planning, because I think we all get that we need to lay out what we really hope to do on a project and when we hope to do things by. But it is tedious. I have looked at some management strategies and resources that suggest that some folks, particularly those in leadership, may spend up to 60% of their time to be effective in planning. And then you have other members of your team where you have that luxury who are on the ground to spend a higher percentage of their time on execution. But a lot of literature available on project management speaks to the fact that you do need to spend a significant portion of your time in planning and framing and working through partnerships in order to be more effective. That's not always easy when you're already in the midst of a project or strategic plan, for example, but it is important to make strides toward creating more space for you to actually make effective strategic work plans and framing and crafting your objectives. And I'll touch on why that really matters in the end. But how we do this process when we get into the nitty gritty here at Oregon, it has been incredibly beneficial. We are still learning. So we definitely do not claim to be the foremost experts on work planning. But there are a lot of work management software. We use one that is called Notion, but there are many like Slack and Trello. I think Portia Lewis at the BNT use one that's called Monday.com. And you just want to find the one that has the functionality that works for you. But looking a little bit at work planning using Notion, which is what we use at org, it is a really cool tool. And what it allows you to do, this is a screenshot from our existing Notion board, is to split up your work in a way that allows you to plug in your departments, your projects, your objectives, some of your deliverables, right down to your tasks. The first structuring of it takes the majority of the time, and this is something that someone who is probably in a senior leadership position is more well suited to do in collaboration with members of the team. That's a really important thing in the work planning process, to make sure that you're not just assigning in the absence of people, but that you do get together with your teams, or if it's just you, that you take the time out to look specifically at your own capacity. But it does allow you to structure your work. This right here is a by department. We're a small organization. There are 5 of us, maybe 3 to 4 consultants, but we sometimes say that we have departments, which are executive management, our citizen engagement or engagement, administration, and communications. And we lay out each project. This isn't all of them, but this is just under what's shown from this particular view. And some of these things can actually be consolidated. So we did what works for us. So for example, if you look under engagement, the first thing that you see is Active Citizens Bahamas National Outreach Series. That's actually not a project. That is just a robust work stream. That's a part of a project. So it's the biggest part of the project, and we wanted to break it out into a specific thing. And we did that in a few instances where maybe one part of a project was so big, we wanted it to have its own section. But if we did go strictly by our project language, there would be less of these cards that show up. The next level that it allows us to look at is project and work streams. This is actually just my department view. So by engagement, the previous slide was looking at all 4 of the departments. This one looks at the projects that are specifically in engagement. And then we move on to being able to populate those projects with activities that need to be done, or tasks that need to be done under each of them. And as you can see, there's a bit of a checklist that's available. And we see who each thing is assigned to. So this is that National Outreach Series project in particular. We have all of our tasks laid out, who is responsible for them, and when those due dates are. I echo that this does take effort and time. The setup is the most difficult part. So because we already have the setup, we don't have to go through all of these columns and categories every time. We can simply go and add in the next thing, and in one box, apply the due date, the task name, the assignees, and all of the relevant things. And then it automatically organizes itself into the project. So I did take a significant amount of time personally, I guess in my capacity as assistant director, to look through all of what the teams were doing over the course of several weeks, and using another existing document to structure this. That front end effort, though, allows us to go right down to this level where I know that right now I got 32 things to do. And that's probably relatable for many of you that are on this call right now. And so now I can look at my task outside of the department, outside of an organization or specific project view, and just look at what it is that I need to be doing. In addition to this, I literally have a notebook. So if I'm traveling or moving around, I can pull the top things that I'm working on, my top priorities, because it works for me. But using software like these building it into your weekly meetings, if you have weekly team meetings, or if you do a lot of solo work, pausing to update this every week or every 2 weeks. It seems tedious, and I know some folks are just like, we don't have the time to do all of this because we have too many projects. But getting yourself positioned to achieve your objectives to the best of your ability, if you have the capacity and where you have the capacity, taking time out to find a software that works for you, or mode of operation if you're more manual, if you want to write or use a Word document. When you form effective objectives and get into the nitty-gritty of planning, y'all please ignore some of these due dates because I needed to go back and change them. Clearly, some of them are much past due. But I have all of the information that I need about my capacity, not just guessing on what's overwhelming me, what's been difficult, where I need volunteer support, where I need increased budget. Instead of just saying, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money, I can sit with Matt and as a leadership of org, we can determine this is where we've fallen off. These types of tasks are common areas that we become overwhelmed with. This is where the funding and capacity is needed, rather than a blanket statement of where I need money. With that information on where we're having hardship, where we need added capacity, it brings us right back to collaboration and partnership. If we're working, the first thing on this list is a draft advocacy toolkit that its initial due date, we've pushed the launch of this, but from this screenshot, its initial due date was months ago. And this is in all transparency. We've all been there. Now I can say, is there a way for us to get volunteer support? I've since delegated this task to a member of my team. But if you can't do that, is there another organization that is doing advocacy that might be interested in creating this tool that you have funding for, that you can disseminate together? Is there a volunteer that you might be able to source for this particular project? It's already there. It just sets you up to be more successful. Because if you have to do it yourself, sometimes it could take a really, really long time if you are oversubscribed. And in the process of getting more organized and forming better objectives that help you to achieve your goal, this level of organization is tough. It's a challenge to get to, but it helps you to make better strategic decisions on what you have going on. So I'm going to
Stefan, I'm just gonna chime in really quickly to reiterate that it was a lot of time to set. There was a lot of time to set it up.
Yes.
And we did have to put a lot of time to that, but it has made things significantly easier. And when you think about engaging with another organization, having a similar model that is where both organizations can meet, it really minimizes the potential of miscommunication or fall away or understanding when you need to readjust or any of that thing. And I will say, just again, we did end up doing the first level of the paid version of it, but most of these tools, the ones that Stefan mentioned, Microsoft Teams, Basecamp, a lot of them out there are free for small groups. So even starting with the free model, you don't that shouldn't be a prohibitive element to trying to use the tools. There should be something out there for almost every group if you're using this, or built into some of the software you already maybe have. But but absolutely, there's a long-term payoff.
Yes. So we're actually coming near toward the end, and we can open up for a bit of discussion in a bit, just some ideas around particular things. But like I said, and if anyone is interested in a bit more on project management is very expansive, but some of these tools, you can definitely let us know. And we would do our best to make arrangements to assist you with getting set up with a tool like this or something similar, and then talk about some of the challenges. But I will bring it home by talking about the benefits of forming these the objectives, once again, are still at the center of being able to do this. The way that everything leads into another thing is all rooted into an objective. And if you look at a strategic plan, for example, I wish I had a graphic to show this, but this sort of just came to me. Often what you will start with is your vision, and then your mission, your goals, your objectives, and then you go down into your outputs, milestones, and so on and so forth. And that's all undergirded sometimes by foundational pillars or expected outcomes. But objectives land right smack dab in the middle. They're not completely in the nitty gritty, but they're not also so very high level that you don't understand what's going on. So at the focal point of being able to create effective plans, effective partnerships, to run an effective NGO or company or any sort of initiative, if it's an individual advocacy campaign, lie these objectives that help to frame up everything that you're doing. And this actually was better served for us in all the time that it took. It probably would have took even longer if we didn't already have existing strategic objectives in our static version of our work plan, which is just a spreadsheet that lays out every month. This is these are some of the objectives for what we hope to achieve. Now, I want to go on to the benefits, and I will open it up for discussion for the last few minutes after this. And I call this the benefits of institutionalizing project management language. That is simply my way of saying using a set of words that mean a specific thing. You can use these ones that we've put forward, but having an established language around how you manage your projects is extremely important. I have listed 5 reasons, there are probably 500. But the first is improved internal communication and training. That's where it begins. Your capacity, your strongest proponent of your organizational capacity is your internal communication and training. You can have rock stars on your team. You could have the biggest and the best. You could be the biggest and the best, because all of us are rock stars in our own regard. But, and believe it or not, internal communication and operation does also speak to when there's only one person or when there are only 2 people. Because your internal communication and training doesn't only look at how you speak to one another among your team, but it looks at your internal way of defining your work, defining your objectives, of seeking your own training and development as an individual. If you're a part of a single person operation or mostly single staff organization or volunteer, that improved internal communication and training happens when we have strong project management language, and particularly when we're very clear on what we mean when we say objectives and what our objectives look like. The other thing is improved program and project continuity. So even though programs typically go on perpetually while projects have a start and end date, they both do abide within the scope of objectives. And one of the reasons why that is incredibly important, thank you, Jerry, and we'll share the resources with you. But one of the reasons why it creates continuity is because when you have an objective, what it often does is it lends itself to the next step in a bigger process. So let's say if we run this citizen engagement campaign that we're on right now, and we know that we have this national outreach series that is meant to reach these islands and do this thing, when we write our report, we say what happened against our objective. We did go to the 10 islands. We did have a 3-part project. What was the outcome or results of that versus our projected outcome? That's going to tell us what our next objective should look like. Maybe it didn't have the intended impact because people weren't primed and they didn't necessarily understand all of what we were talking about, or didn't appear based on a post test that they got from what we were doing, what we had expected. So we know that either we need to go again and spend a little more time on something and we can form the next objective, or if they did get it, we know that the next level, if level 1 was giving them information that will empower them to do something, the next objective may look at running a project that actually allows them to use the knowledge that they gain. Because giving them the knowledge and hoping that they use it all in one objective or in one campaign may not always be feasible for those of us that work on the ground or do outreach or any development of the individual. We know that it has to be taken in stride. People don't transform in every way overnight or even over the space of one project or even a few years. So it gives you the opportunity to create better continuity within your organizations. I think a really key point on that, using us as an example, One of our principal funders, the Templeton Religion Trust, every time we write a grant, whether that is a 3-year or a 1-year grant, as it has become as of late, one of their stipulations is that we don't repeat the same project over and over again. It can have the same overall goal, but our objective needs to move from point A to point B. That level of accountability challenges us to be innovative and creative, but also to look specifically. If we know next year we cannot ask for funding for the exact same project, then we need to make sure that we're not promising 10 years worth of results with 1 year's objective. So that means if they want something else next year, let's focus on a bite-sized bit of a bigger picture over a longer period of time versus trying to change the world in one swoop. Better public awareness. I'm huge on this, absolutely huge on this. Members of the community, whether that is people from a specific island, school students, whoever your target audiences are, the wider general public, the media, who a lot of us depend upon to help us get our message out there, potential donors. When we have objectives and we use that language and we're used to describing it in terms of specific language. Stephanie, I think you do a great job at this. Every time we ask Stephanie to talk about what she does, I hear the objectives. I hear specific, this is checkbox 1, this is checkbox 2, this is checkbox 3. I can take that and tell somebody else about what they're doing, even if I'm not involved in it. As a member of the public, I understand that you're doing 1, 2, and 3 because of the language that you use. So a lot of folks that may have more complex missions like org, we're talking legislative reform and economic development and the SDGs and long-term change and really, really big terms that translate into really, really specific actions. It could be hard. It could be really, really difficult for some of the environmental groups. You're talking climate change and ocean acidification and all of these complex terms that folks may not be able to understand off the bat. Having specific language and objectives that help people to follow along will really transform the impact that you have, if simply by making more members of the public better aware of what you're doing, because they can just follow along with your 1, 2, 3 language. We've talked about this entire time creating a better landscape for building partnerships, and that's a pertinent thing to understand. If we're engaging with one another as organizations and it's not necessarily clear what it is that you hope to do and how, it's going to be really difficult to form partnerships. And even though in a cluster model, we may be framing up some objectives together, it's really important that in that diagram that Matt showed, where there are the cluster objectives or goals versus the organization's objectives and goals, that you come into it with a defined set of objectives for yourself, because it'll make sure that when you form a cluster, that all of that great work that's happening together is achieving a thing, but it also does contribute to the outcome of your organization, because there needs to be benefit for everyone that is involved. And then finally, improved fundraising potential. As someone that has worked in the sector for 10 years and volunteered for a little longer, I have definitely seen any successful fundraising initiatives as one with clear objectives, believe it or not. You could have the greatest photos, you could have the prettiest graphics, and I'm a big proponent of great photos and pretty graphics. You could have the best videos, you can do interviews with your beneficiaries, but at the end of the day, a lot of times that one factor in all of our beautifully put together projects that can either make or break a proposal is having good objectives. So we drastically improve our fundraising potential. You never know when you're talking to a donor, but when they hear that 3 islands and 10 this and that very specific objective language, they say, well, I wanted to reach this many islands, or I wanted to do this type of project. And it instantly sounds like we align. As Matt said, in subsequent sessions, we are looking to bring in donors to talk to us as potential beneficiaries about what they want and what they expect. And I can guarantee you that having clear objectives is probably going to be something that they all echo. And in the conversations that we have had with them thus far, those that we're hoping to invite to one of our subsequent sessions, that has been the thing that they've said to us, that for monitoring and evaluation purposes, it's very, very important to us that organizations are specific, measured, that they set goals that are achievable and relevant, and that they work within the allocated time. So it all goes back to that focal point of objectives and building effective objectives. So I don't know if there were any questions on that. We do know that this is an intensive process because there's a lot to learn and the information comes from a myriad of sources over many, many years of experience, not just from ourselves, but from our partners like some of you. And so we salute your dedication to this process for those of you that have been a part of this so far. And if there's any way that we can make it better, we're always open to it. But as it pertains to our objectives, forming cluster objective goals, or anything that Matt may have shared this morning, we would be glad to take any questions at this point. And I think I saw a raised hand, but I'm juggling.
Hi, yes, it's Juliet with
Okay.
Hope Town and Abaco Zero Waste. First of all, thank you for a very, informative presentation with lots of information. One question I have is, has there been an assessment of organizations within the Bahamas on their different, the different project management tools that they are currently using or software? Because I'm looking at monday.com. I thought it was really interesting that you use Notion. So when we're looking at cluster coordination and multi-stakeholder engagement, I think it would be quite interesting to see what different organizations are actually using, because if you are partnering, and let's say we start to see a trend of, 50% or 60% are using one particular software over another, even having like a training session to show the differences, the pros and the cons of the two, and how it might be more applicable, and or how the different softwares may be able to use, like, can they merge? Can they work together? That if two organizations are using two different project management tools, can they actually somehow sync that you don't have to reinvent the wheel? Because as you and Matt mentioned, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into setting up a project management system. And so now if you're engaging on a particular project, how that might feed in together so that it's actually cohesive. Right. It's a question, but I just wanted to know if there has been an assessment like that done yet.
Well, first of all, that is a great question. I think it's a really, really important thing to be able to address. I think the short answer is we haven't looked specifically at project management software. But on a positive or progressive rather note, we do have what I would consider basically ongoing studies of civil society in the Bahamas. We've worked with Civil Society Bahamas, the NGO, as well as the Winnie Luther Foundation around mapping of the sector. And we have a few projects in the pipeline right now that we're super excited about, but still in preliminary discussion, which is great that that comment came up now, around what we should be mapping for, and how often we should update that information, how we work with overseeing bodies like the Registrar General's Office around NGO management. And I don't know that we had particularly put in for looking at project management software, but that question does actually make me a believer that would definitely be a great injustice not to take into consideration. I do know that many of the larger softwares do speak to in their marketing integrations between other platforms. And I think that it would be worth looking at what that looks like. And then it also does give the opportunity to, as we gather, begin to determine what we feel are the best softwares for work across organizations. And then even when it comes to paid subscriptions, sharing those subscriptions, because I do know that in Notion, there is capability of having shared and private boards within a team. And I could definitely see the benefit of some smaller organizations working together on a subscription, for example, for a particular platform. But in the grand scheme of things, if we are talking about professionalizing our sector and getting to the next place of being able to effectively work together, I think that that should be factored in. And I have definitely made a note of that to incorporate into our upcoming projects around mapping what's happening in civil society, looking at what project management software folks are using. So thank you so much for that question.
Yeah, because I'll just touch on one thing that I think about is even if there are new organizations or new collaborations, such as our group, coming together and formalizing, although we may not need it necessarily in its full scale right now, it would be beneficial to start off even with like the free version. So looking at from a nationwide perspective, if there's a trend that lends itself towards one software or another, for specific reasons when it comes to scalability or something like that, I think it would be very beneficial to know that.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So we will definitely look at pulling that information together. I think that's actually a very fascinating and important concept. Were there any other questions or comments?
No, none for me right now. Thank you.
Not a problem. We're preparing to wrap up, but I will say that the information is definitely going to be made available in the short term from today's session. So if there are any members of your organization that you would like to share this specific information with, feel free to let us know. I will say, I also appreciate the responsiveness of everyone throughout this process so far. It has been pretty easy communicating with folks. And I did want to make a note from our end specifically that we are on our Active Citizens Bahamas campaign that is actually traveling to the islands from that objective mentioned. And I have been most of our primary point of contact. So if I am out of commission, normally it'll just be for a day or two because we are traveling pretty frequently. And we will be for the next several months. But I will make an effort to make sure that I get back to everyone, and I have one of my consultants on the ground to help us to connect. But if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to let us know. Our next session is definitely going to be hybrid again, so it may be the Grand Bahama session, but we'll certainly send out, that information in a very short term. And we appreciate everyone's flexibility and adaptability throughout this process. We know that this work will pay off, and every time we have a session, the information becomes evergreen. So we will keep it posted on our site for distribution and sharing with other organizations. I think that is it, but I will definitely keep everyone in the loop. I'm going to drop my email in the chat. I feel as though everyone who is on here should have it. And you should be getting regular email updates from me. So if you are not, please send me an email and let me know. And this is my work number. Like I said, if I'm not responsive right away, I may be traveling, but I will make my best effort to get back in a timely fashion. Oh, and then our backup email that my entire team has access to is citizens@orgbahamas.com. So that is another one that you can reach. But I do want to say thank you, everyone, for your participation in this session. We hope that it was impactful. We're always open to your feedback on how we can be more comprehensive, more inclusive, to touch on things that are more relevant to what each of you are facing. And we'll continue to do that to the best of our ability. But like I said, we are here if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and we will keep you up to date with when our next training session is going to be. So thank you all so much for your time, and we will be in touch in the short term.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Stefan.
We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Stefan.
Have a great day, everyone.
You
You
too.
too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Stefan, Evans.
Bye.